Hi, this is Sean, and this channel's called Wolf Dog Moon. And today we're going to do a review of Brandon Sanderson's Words of Radiance. And it's part of a series called, it's book 2 of the Stormlight Archive. If you like this kind of content, smash that like button. Subscribe to our channel for more. Ring the bell so you don't miss out on our next upload. Comment down below and share with your friends. Alright, let's get into this. Alright, so if you see my previous review, I kind of alluded to the fact that I might do a Brandon Sanderson review. And if you've checked out my Wheel of Time, Crossroads of Twilight book review, I mentioned Brandon Sanderson because he essentially was the one that took on the mantle to finish the Wheel of Time after Robert Jordan passed away. Now, I've read, like before this Words of Radiance, in this Stormlight Archive, like this is book 2. Book 1 is called The Way of Kings, and the Way of Kings, and then Words of Radiance. And now there are supposed to be more books to come out after Words of Radiance, which I own the next one. I think it's called Oath Bringer, which I haven't got around to reading. And I think the goal with this Stormlight Archive is it's an attempt to be in the vein of the Wheel of Time. And already right off the bat, I'm just gonna cut to the chase here, and especially if you've seen my Wheel of Time review. If not, you could maybe pause it here and go back and watch that review, so that when you come back here for this one, you'll understand the context. And there's, in a lot of ways, there's no coincidence that Brandon Sanderson is the one that they use for the Wheel of Time, because they're essentially trying to start that over, do this big giant grand saga, and they're going to call it the Stormlight Archive. And unfortunately, it right away kind of devolves into the same problems that eventually happens with the Wheel of Time, where and it doesn't take long for that to happen here, and I'll discuss that in this review. And it's like they didn't learn from their mistake, or they had the publisher, I don't know if this is the same publisher. I'm just gonna assume that it may be. I guess it's Tor. You know, maybe they made so much money or something with the Wheel of Time that they're gonna do it again, only with this Stormlight Archive. So getting into this series, I'd like to backtrack a little bit. Long before Brandon Sanderson worked on the Wheel of Time, I think the first book I read by him was called Elantris, which I enjoyed the book, although it had some of the issues that were in this book rear its ugly head kind of in these other books to different degrees too. The same problem that was in this Elantris. But I did enjoy the book Elantris. It was an interesting concept, and it had some cool characters and some world building. And then these books in this Stormlight Archive, they have heavy world building, and which can be a good thing and a bad thing in these particular books. So the other thing I'd like to point out is, okay, I read the first book, The Way of Kings, and these books, this one and the previous one, The Way of Kings, they're like tomes. They're massive, chunky books. Like this one's like, you know, it clocks in at over, let's see, it's over 1,200 pages of, I'm not going to look exactly what it is. And similarly, the previous one, The Way of Kings, was, you know, a big hefty tome like this one too. Now, right off the bat, this, I didn't enjoy this one. To me, it suffers from what I would compare it to is like sequelitis, where you go see this movie that was pretty good kind of thing. You know, it's like there was good parts of it, and then there was other parts that they left unfinished or whatever, and so it kind of sets up for a sequel. And then when you watch the sequel, it is not as good, and it has gone in this weird direction. And also they make decisions and actually kind of devolve the characters, or they change the characters that in significant ways that contradicts how the characters were in the previous movie. And this book suffers from a similar situation, whereas in the first book, if you know, there's probably going to be a little bit of spoilers if you haven't read the previous book. So if you haven't done that, you should probably not watch the rest of this video, because although I'll try to be brief and kind of try to keep from it being too spoilerly, there probably will be a little bit of spoiling in this video. So if you haven't read The Way of Kings and you're thinking of doing it, I would say go and read that one first, and then come and watch this review. Now, having read The Way of Kings, it centers around this character called Kaladin, and then there's another character called Dalinar, and those two are my favorite characters. There's a lot of, they're cool archetypes, and they are also like on a journey, and it's the hero's journey, and the characters develop as they're essentially trying to both get ready for this kind of epic, it's like there's this great battle that's approaching, and the warnings have been there for everyone to see, but they're the only ones that can you know, sense what's coming and want to do something about it. And they're kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum. The Dalinar character, he's like the top advisor slash caretaker to the king, like he's the top general. He's the one that the king has appointed to lead the armies across the Shattered Plains, and he's seeing visions and stuff of what's to come, of this the Void Bringers, and this threat that looms large over this epic battle that they have with these enemies called the Parashandai. And so he essentially is trying to warn them, but they're more interested in profit and obtaining these gems and stuff, and they're more interested in squabbling over power and getting you know, getting in the king's grace, and you know, moving up. It's like they're part of different factions, and they want to move up in terms of their prestige level in this particular society. And then on the polar opposite of that is this character called Kaladin, and he's a slave, and he has to fight in this as part of this bridge crew, where the Shattered Plains, they're separated. They're like these outcroppings that are separated, kind of like if you traveled across like a lake that had been drained, and you have all the cracks of the clay that's left over, and if you you know, if you were tiny warriors battling on those plains, how would you move across them? Well, they have these bridges that they put down in order to fight these Parashundai people. Now, it's really cool in that way. So you have that dichotomy where you have this slave. He's trying to, he's basically manifesting these awesome powers at the same time where he's branded as a slave, and the society as a whole has like a distinction between these light eyes and dark eyes. And so there is a kind of Marxist class system that has been separated, you know, the people have been separated into. And that's the Way of Kings. It's an awesome, you really want to get behind the Kaladin character, and then you really want to get behind this Dalinar guy. He's the epitome of the general, that he has the plan and no one can see the vision of his machinations in terms of what he needs to do. And he looks on, eventually, you know, spoiler alert, he discovers this Kaladin guy, and he sees him as somebody he can use in order to achieve his goals when no one else believes. They believe that he's a madman. So with that as a backdrop, you have that pretty cool tale going on in The Way of Kings. But then kind of shoehorned into the book, and it's in this one even more, is there's a female character. It's pretty much all the female characters in this book and the previous one. There's a character called Shalyn, I think is her name. And you're basically, the way that this writer does it is he separates the book into, you're going to read so much of Dalinar's perspective, then you're going to read Kaladin's perspective, and then you're going to read her perspective. And they're on the hero's journey. They're like, for example, if you're someone who likes wrestling, pro wrestling, they're what I would call a face. They're trying to do things the right way. They're on the hero's journey. But then you have shoehorned into this book and the previous one, you have this Shalyn character, and she is kind of, she's like a heel in wrestling, if you know what I mean. She's an anti-hero. Her motivations are they're narcissistic. Her motivations come from a place of you're following along what she's supposed to be doing, and the book wants you to get behind this character, but it's presented as if she's some weird ideal that you should aspire towards, but she's like an anti-hero, if you understand my meaning. And so quickly the book drags when you get the previous book called The Way of Kings. It drags when you get to her parts, and then in this one, this book goes full tilt with this character, where they have to minimize this. The author, Brandon Sanderson, and the publisher, they have to kind of devolve the Kaladin and Dalinar character in order to kind of transfer their heroic qualities to the Shalyn character, but it's not earned. It's never earned at any point. And also her character is, it's what I would call very narcissistic, narcissistic in a way, where it's like the book is constantly trying to push this character, the story, and every time it tries to do that, it fails, and the book stumbles. It's like hitting kind of this stumbling thing, and now you're stumbling, trudging through her scenes, and you know that, okay, she's headed towards these other characters, and sure enough, when she does, especially in this book, right here, she's gonna let them know what they should be doing. It's one of those kind of characters where this character knows what it's first of all, she's like an anti-hero, and so, but she's the one that you're supposed to be getting behind, but she's been kind of out of the, like, on a side quest, like her own personal side quest to reestablish her family's honor, dignity, and also reputation, but she's doing it from like a devious way, in terms of she's presenting herself as somebody that she's not. So I guess that's how I would put it. And this book really devolves into that, where they have to essentially kind of squash those other characters, Dalinar and Kaladin, and even you have this cool character Adolin, who is Dalinar's son. And then they have another son who he's kind of like a nerd, and he can't, really function from a battle standpoint as like a warrior, because in these books, essentially, the Light Eyes people, they can acquire these shards, and which is armor and a weapon, so they become known as shard bearers. And so they're gifted with these supernatural equipment that turns them into like superheroes. And then the Kaladin character, he can have these powers as he moves along through the story. And again, if you haven't, I'm trying not to spoil it as I'm doing this review. So if you haven't read the other book, Way of Kings, I did like the book, but parts of it I didn't like what I explained with the Shaolin character. And then this book just devolves. And so where it's very ham-fisted. And hold on one second, please. Okay, it's very hand-fisted with especially the female characters, such as Shallan, where it feels like the author, this Brandon Sanderson, he took, this sort of almost like a Twitter, social media type, I don't know if stereotype's the right word, but this weird idealized version of the female in the last 10 years, where they can do what the men can do, and it's very ham-fisted is the only way I can put it, where the other characters feel like, okay, they take place in this fantasy setting with the world building and stuff, except for the female characters such as Shallan. It feels like she comes from 2020, 2021, or 2022 and has been inserted but has no memory of being from this world, like our own time period, like somewhat of like a politically correct kind of thing, where this book uses kings and queens and royalty and stuff. So you have the monarchy type system in this. So it's not democracy. It's not a democratic system, and it's more of a kind of pseudo medieval, trope, where you have the king, and then you have even the king even has like a jester, and then you have these different kind of lords and ladies underneath, and they have different prestige level. And then you have the it's feudalism, so you have a class beneath, and there's no way for that class below to to cross the gap. And so then you have this Kaladin character who he's a serf, basically. He's even below that, he's a slave. And so in the first book, The Way of Kings, you see that he's more than what he appears. And as he progresses through the book, you see that he's he's the way of kings. He has the stuff of this of the monarchy, and he should be entitled to some of the way they're treated and stuff. But he kind of devolves in this book, where he devolves into like anger, bitterness, and hatred. Where in this particular book, whereas in the first one, he was more noble in terms of how he saw everybody as equals, and that everyone's life is something to be cherished. And so he's part of this bridge crew, and he's going to try to keep these guys alive, by any means. And so you're getting behind him, sort of like the movie Braveheart, where he's taking on not only impossible odds, but he's taking on the monarchs and their system and their cruelty and their lack of empathy or respect or humanity in terms of how they see these people who aren't light eyes. So it's pretty cool in that way, but also there are, like I said, there's the silly aspects to it, where you have these, especially like I said, the female characters, where they're like from 2020, and they're smashed into this book. And so every time you get to their parts, it's like now you're on the Twitter feed or something, or now you're listening to one of the news stations or whatever, and what they're talking about. So it takes you out of the story. So, and I would say that with this book, this book really suffers from that. And so there's a lot of breaking your immersion. And like, I think it's this one where there's even a character in here where she's like, this is awesome. She keeps saying stuff is awesome, like we would say in the time that we live, I'm gonna be awesome and everything I do is awesome. And so she's focused on that, and it just it takes you out of the story, and it breaks your immersion. And then this book becomes really convoluted as you get towards the end. And then there's what's supposed to be a shocking surprise at the end of the book that is so convoluted and ham-fisted that I don't want to continue in this series. And like I said before, it suffers from the wheel of time padding, where nothing's really happening. Essentially, this one feels like it takes the original book and just kind of shifts the characters up and down in terms of their development. So where Kaladin already his character already had the growth, and then this book regresses him far before all this development in terms of character development that was present in the first book, The Way of Kings. So for me, I would give this book, if I was using a 5-star system, to me this is like a 1.5-star book. It's got some cool bits in it, but it's got this book, this should be a 300-page book. It has a lot of stuff. It's trying too hard to be this grand epic without actually having all the content to do it. There's so much in here it's never explained in terms of the society outside of, for example, the Shattered Plains. We're focusing on the Shattered Plains, which is one part, an aspect of the kingdom, but it's never explained how the kingdom's being run without, for example, the king is on the Shattered Plains. And so at times it feels like almost like King Richard's Fair or something, where it's Chaucer's the Canterbury Tales, where it's focused on the jousting and where the king is doing his processionals and all that kind of stuff in the training grounds of the warriors, but it's completely separated and divorced from the other parts of this world that we're supposed to get invested in, and we're in this tiny part of it, and it never really feels like, okay, this needs to be so many pages, it needs to be so long. You know, like I said, this could be a 300-page book, and it would be a decent page turner in terms of a fun book. You know, I kind of put this on the level too of like like a Star Wars novel, where it's not the movies. Like the movies, the original 3 movies have this grand epic that plays out from, like, you know, the original Star Wars movie, then Empire Strikes Back, and then Return of the Jedi. And whereas I would say this would be like one of those supplementary books that takes place where after Return of the Jedi, or in between, where it's information you didn't really need to know, but okay, you need to know, for example, that what Han Solo was doing, you know, or you know what such and such a character was doing between the 2 movies, but it doesn't really add anything to the story that's critical for you could skip it. So this entire book feels like that, but it's like 1,200 pages or more long. So let me know what your opinions on this series. Before I started reading this book, I was excited about getting into this after The Way of Kings, and I had pre-ordered the book that's after this. I think it's called Oathbreaker or Oathbringer, but I haven't been able to bring myself to read it, especially how this one ends. So that's my review of Brandon Sanderson, The Words of Radiance. I would consider this, I would put him in the same category as like Robert Jordan, where I feel like he's very overrated. There's aspects to his writing that's neat in the same way that you have, he creates these kind of like magic systems and rules that are kind of neat, like on the, you know, in the vein of like Dungeons and Dragons or Magic the Gathering. Like he sets up these different keywords and these interesting, you know, ways of how the magic functions and how this works and how that works, which is pretty neat. But a lot of times it devolves and feels a lot like you know, one of those Star Wars novels that you know you don't really need to, it's just kind of supplementary, but the meat of the story is those original movies that you've seen. So that's the category I would put Brandon Sanderson in. So you get this neat kind of, oh, that would be a cool concept, but then it's kind of drug over too many pages. So let me know what your opinions are in the comments down below, and I hope that this video finds you having an amazing day, and we hope that you have a blessed day. Signing out.